Yeah, and that's a great point, and kind of leads into the next topic, which is muscular imbalance. But,
Sure.
even when I'm training 12, 13, 14-year-olds, I'm always kind of surprised when I get them for the first time if they can't even do maybe 2-3 push-ups.
Sure. I really think that it's one of those. The muscular imbalance thing is really what we've seen here, and again, we see it more here because especially the athletes that have been training. A lot of times, again, what we found, and I know it sounds kind of cliche, but all of our athletes, everything they can see in the mirror has traditionally been pretty strong. Or strong is a relative term, but they've been stronger. Everything they can has been, fairly weak. Everything you can't see in the mirror. Those, especially the posterior shoulder girdle and the posterior chain for lower body has been pretty weak. And those muscular imbalances, I think, are caused. I think with, they can lead to not only just performance issues but injury issues and also just postural issues as well too. We have a lot of, we all have a lot of what the National Academy of Sports Medicine calls the upper cross syndrome, where again their shoulders are slumped forward, kind of the Neanderthal look, and for some athletes it's because they've trained the bench press or other exercises in that really that's I guess that sagittal plane for so long, and they've never really had that imbalance or have had a balance with the pulling. Their pushes are a lot more than their pulls as far as when you come to exercise prescription. And again, a lot of times with the that can also lead, with postural issues, especially with male and female athletes, is that, that shoulders back posture is something that, obviously is not, especially for young people, they're not taught to sit up or stand up straight, and plus you add sitting in front of a computer or TV for a long time. I mean, that it all gets compounded. So the muscular imbalances are really, really an issue, and I think that really the shoulder, I think, obviously balancing the pushes and pulls, and a lot of times, and it happens at any level. You have a lot of coaches that prescribe a lot of pressing, obviously in that, that horizontal plane, and really, and never address anything as far as pulls, and you have a lot of maximum effort type bench presses, and then you try to combine those with some very light, scapular retraction or external rotation, and think that that's going to balance. And I think you need a little bit more. So we try to prescribe more pulls than, as far as total sets and total volume, more pulls than presses. And, so we try to play, we separate up into horizontal vertical push, horizontal vertical pull, and we try to add an extra set of pulls for, almost, sometimes that ratio can be, 3 to 5 or 2 to 3 or basically, but we want to have, as much pulling exercises as possible. The other part is obviously with that posterior chain, and this really leads to some injury. We have so many of our athletes that are quad dominant, female athletes especially, and being, quad dominant, and because of, again, and it could be due to the nature of their sport. It could be due to they're not strong enough to be in a low position. They bend at the knees and they don't really get those, obviously their hips back when they're in a defensive position, regardless of the sport. But really it comes down to, it really with that posterior chain, and again, the lack of hamstring and glute strength compared to quad hip flexor strength. And it's evident not only just, if you have the athlete perform a squat, but it ends up being evident when they just with sprint. If you watch an athlete sprint, and we talk about front side and back side mechanics with the triple extension, triple flexion, a lot of times you have these athletes that, if their hip flexors are real tight, they end up, those hip flexors can really pull down on, the front, for that the top front of that pelvis. And if their hamstrings are not strong enough and they're elongated, now you're more susceptible. That's not. All of a sudden you have that. With obviously with the hips being tilted. An anterior pelvic tilt. Now the hamstrings are more elongated. They're more susceptible to pulls. Plus that muscular imbalances puts a lot more stress on the ACL. Because again, when that, if that tibia can come forward, it can lead to, the lower leg bone come forward. It can lead to some ACL injuries, and really all of a sudden now you have an athlete that's quad dominant. Well, every activity they do, is every time they change direction, they're going to obviously change direction and put the brunt of that force on the quads instead of the glutes and hamstrings, or a combination of all three. Your body's always going to want to, use the muscle groups that are the strongest. So all of a sudden, that's why you have, a lot of athletes with knee pain, because they're so quad dominant, and because they don't have that muscular imbalance. And, obviously we have had issues with some of our sports with quad strains. And a lot of it wasn't because their quads were weak, it's because their quads were overcompensating for the lack of strength in other muscle groups. So even with something like, with speed mechanics, and if your hip flexors are tight, you're more susceptible to the injury, but also it's inhibiting your performance. If your glutes and hamstrings aren't strong enough to push off the ground on that triple extension, and your hip flexors are so tight that it's inhibiting you from getting a maximum, stride length every time, just that combination right there can obviously lead to just, decreased speed. So that's another issue, that those muscular imbalances can not only lead to injury, but really can inhibit performance as well. And that's the one thing. That's why we try to address those as soon as possible.
Mark, that is great information, and I'm sure the listeners here, have like 10,000 more questions that they'd like me to ask. And hopefully you can come back on in the future, but I know that you have to run to a practice today in a few minutes. So is there any final piece of advice that you'd like to leave with the athletes who are listening today?
Well, I think that, the biggest thing is that, I think that sometimes that you're not going to be, for young athletes, you're not going to be able to go from, where you are now to, a professional athlete, overnight. I think it's one of those things that it's just going to take time. And I think that a lot of athletes, they want to fix it. I want to improve my vertical jump by 5 inches. Okay, well, it's, you want to do that in, 5 days, and it might not take 5 days, might not take 5 weeks, might take 5 months. And I think that that's one of the things that athletes have to understand. It's this long, slow process, and it's like I said, and everything's cumulative. So that what you're doing now is going to have effect on how you're going to be training, in a few months. And I think that it's one of those things that, that how well you do something is going to be more important than how much weight you can do, because it's all relative term, and I think that, athletes want to get stronger. And you got to understand is that, they want to put, if you have an athlete that's, for example, it's performing a parallel squat with 185 and they want to squat 225, and they want to squat it by the next workout. Well, that much of a jump, might not. It's going to take you. Obviously a 30-pound jump for a squat is pretty good in maybe 6 months, 9 months. So it's not going to happen overnight. I think that that's the one thing that people have to understand. The other thing is, I think that, the one thing, and I might be different than a lot of people with this, but I think that, just general strength is that it's that glass ceiling. I think that, that maximum strength, or basically that absolute strength, is the glass ceiling, that if, and again, it doesn't mean that the strongest athletes are the fastest and more explosive, but what it means is that any athlete that gets stronger, right, and maintains that muscular balances where they're not getting stronger in just one muscle group, but their overall body strength is improving, that is going to obviously eliminate, or not eliminate, I would say, but it's going to decrease the chance of, non-contact injuries, and it's going to be able, the more force you can apply to the ground, the faster you're going to run, the more efficiently you're going to change direction, the higher you're going to jump. If just jumping was going to improve your vertical jump, well, everybody, you figure a basketball practice, I mean, every one of those athletes jump, they end up jumping, hundreds and hundreds of times a day. But the inhibiting factor, for a lot of them will be maximal strength, and that's one thing I think that athletes have to work on. And when you look at judging strength, again, you have an athlete that can do obviously a pistol squat, one-legged squat, totally parallel, and do that for sets. To me is going to be more impressive than an athlete that can put a bunch of weight on his back and squat halfway down and halfway up, and you know what I mean. So I think it's really. Right. Yeah, I think they have to, if you're going to emphasize something as a young athlete, is, again, patience, proper technique, and really it's got to be a year-long thing. I think the problem with sometimes this country is that too many athletes have been specialized, because those sports, again, sports nowadays are not, a couple month sports. I mean, any sport you're looking at, I mean, whether it's baseball, lacrosse, basketball, soccer, they're almost year-round sports. So the multi-sport athlete has been being reduced, it seems, every year. And I think that that's something that, obviously, being able to play multiple sports and being able to strength train year-round. It doesn't mean weight train, it just means strength train year-round is something that's going to, obviously help those athletes as long as possible. And again, because, again, it is a long road to haul for any athletes that want to improve. So, again, it's one of those things that everything's important, and when you talk about, obviously the ability to play your sport is obviously one of the most important things. But, obviously, strength, flexibility, mobility, nutrition, rest and recovery. Even for young athletes, I think we downplay that too much. But all those little things are just a piece of the puzzle, and I think that athletes have to obviously understand that their effort is going to be the main factor to get them where they need to be, not necessarily. If there was one workout that would work for everybody, then you wouldn't need a lot of strength coaches. Everybody would just do that one workout. But the thing is that no matter what your coach or trainer or whoever gives you, it's going to be that athlete's, ability to it can't be your parents' motivation, It can't be the parents' motivation, hey, I'm going to shell out all this money to go ahead and get trained. And if the athlete doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to do it, they're not going to benefit from it. So it's got to be a little bit of some intrinsic motivation for that athlete to want to improve, not only at all the sports they're playing, but just to just be a better, at life. So I think that's one of the reasons, I'll finish with this. And I know I've been kind of like blabbing on here, but, one of the things that I think the reason why I got into strength and conditioning in the first place was I feel it's totally objective. The weights don't lie, the stopwatch doesn't lie. It's one of those things that it's totally objective. And 100 pounds today was 100 pounds 10 years ago. It's going to be 100 pounds in 10 more years, and it's the same for all of us. And it's the one thing that is very objective. In a world where sports have been very subjective, I think it's the one common theme that athletes can, a vertical jump, you're testing it the same way for a bunch of athletes. It's going to be the same for everyone, and that's not going to lie when it comes to performance. So it's the one, I guess, it's the one motivating factor, and it's the one factor that keeps all the other, subjective factors in line when it comes to athletic performance.
Mark, this has been great information, and really what comes through is not only your knowledge, but your passion for your athletes. So, I think the athletes at Denison are lucky to have you, and I think my listeners today are luckier to have you on the line. So this is great information, and I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate the time, Brian. Obviously, being a colleague, I have a tremendous amount of respect for what you're doing and how you're trying to help young athletes. And any time I can be available, or any time I can be of service, please, encourage everyone just to contact me at the Denison website, and I would be happy to help anyone I could.
Okay, great. And on the website, I'll post the article that Mark wrote, and I'll also put a link back to the Denison site where they can take a look. Denison University is doing some great things in their athletic program.
Well, I appreciate it, Ron. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Okay, no problem.